Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Tuesday afternoon. And again, it's another one of those slow days for basketball. There's not really much going on in the world of the NBA. So for this podcast, I'm really just going to be doing a lot of lists. So the first segment is going to be talking about all the teams in the Central Division, how I would feel if I was a fan of every single one of these teams, and what I think the ceilings for these teams are going to be, and also where I think the lowest point of their season could possibly be, and what could be their lowest point, what are the most wins they could get, what are the least wins they could get, since the season is going to start rather soon. And then in the second segment, I'm going to make a case talking against every single team in the every single top team, at least in the NBA, like all the top teams that don't really have that much of a chance going into the season. Then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about some play-in teams as well as their ceiling, whether they're going to be draft lottery teams or they're going to be playoff teams. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about that in the third segment. And then finally, in the fourth segment, I'm going to address Magic Johnson and his comments on Anthony Edwards in regards to Anthony Edwards' comments on how he believes that the only player in the 90s and in the 80s that actually had skill was Michael Jordan. So I'm going to go ahead and be talking about that in the fourth segment. We also have the fifth segment where I'm continuing the list of players whom I don't think deserve an MVP in a specific year, and I've been doing this list all through last year. So not last year, all through last week, excuse me. So if you guys want to see me do more, just always tune in towards the end of the fourth segment to figure out exactly who I'm going to be talking about. Before I begin, however, I'd like to remind everybody that we love hearing from what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a burning question, a hot take for the game, or something that you want to share. We're all ears. The show is all about keeping the conversation lively and making sure your voice is a part of the mix. And if you really want your comment to get noticed, then you can go ahead and hit the $ below the chat box and send in your super chat. That message is guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's also a great way to support the channel. If super chat isn't really your thing, you could always use the link displayed below the ticker or the link in the description, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can get your comment noticed that way. And so those are two ways you can get your comments noticed if you really want it to be a part of the show. And with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and get into the first segment, which is going to be talking about how I would feel if I was a fan of these Central Division teams going into this season. So we're going to do in the order of which from best record to worst record. So each team that ended with the best record in the regular season is going to be the team that I talk about first, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter which round these teams have exited, because every single one of these teams exited in a completely different round than the other. So the first team that I'm going to talk about is the Milwaukee Bucks. They were the best team in the Central Division. They had one of the best players in the NBA in Giannis Antetokounmpo. He was top 4 in the MVP voting. I believe he was only behind SGA, Luka Doncic, and Nikola Jokic. And he is also one of the only players to average the numbers that he's averaged in that season. I believe the numbers that he averaged in that season was close to around 30 points per game, and as well as 60+% shooting from the field. And those numbers are just so good and so rare that we don't really see many players average those kinds of numbers in a single season. I mean, 30 points per game is difficult enough, but on 61% shooting from the field, that's ridiculous. And what's even more ridiculous is the fact that this team ended up losing in the first round. They ended up losing in the first round mainly because of Giannis and Damian Lillard getting injured in the postseason. Giannis got injured like 3 games before the postseason actually started, and then Damian Lillard got injured in the postseason. But they ended up winning a game without them, like without either of them, which is really surprising. But this season also, Dame and Giannis ended up making the All-Star team, but Dame was sort of, let on the team, mainly because there weren't really that many good guards in the Eastern Conference that were competent enough to really, take a spot from him. And Damian Lillard he's a very popular player in the NBA, especially now that he's on Milwaukee. Like, he was popular in Portland, but now he's even more popular on this team. And he was sort of out of shape in the regular season, mainly because he didn't want to get injured, so he didn't work out all that much in the off season of last year. So maybe Damian Lillard could get better, but if I was a fan of this team, Damian Lillard has to get better if this team, has any title hopes. And if they can get the best version of Damian Lillard, then they probably have the best team on paper and the best duo in the league. And that's enough to contend with the Boston Celtics, in my opinion, if you have a team like that. And with somebody as dominant as Giannis is, him and Dame are going to have to perform if they want to match up against, the Pacers, which was a team that they really struggled against in the regular season. And if they want to match up against the Cavs, if they want to match up against the Heat, if they want to match up against the Celtics, who are the main team to beat in the Eastern Conference. And speaking of the Cavs, they're another team in the Central Division. They ended up taking the 4th seed of the Eastern Conference, ended up beating the Orlando Magic in a 7-game series, and they lost in the second round to the Boston Celtics in 5 games. And really, the biggest question I have for the Cavs is, not really a big question, but one of the things that I'd be excited for if I was a Cavs fan would be the fact that Donovan Mitchell is returning for another few seasons. And rumors were everywhere around Donovan Mitchell getting traded and Darius Garland getting traded as well. And the threat that the Cavs would have to restart completely. But now that, Donovan Mitchell is here to stay, they don't have to make that many changes to their roster, but they do have to produce now. And if Jalen Tyson can become a really competent player for the Cavs, then this team can really go far, because we already know that Donovan is going to play well. We know that Garland is going to play well, Evan Mobley as well, and really it's all going to come down to how the rest of the players stepped up. They were able to win without Donovan Mitchell on the on the Cavs when they went up against the Boston Celtics. That was a common theme throughout a lot of the postseason. A lot of the a lot of the teams that they played against just didn't have the best player on their team, yet they still were able to beat the Boston Celtics in a game, which is it's very interesting. But this Cavs team, obviously, they went on I believe it was a 15-game winning streak in the regular season. Maybe an 8-game winning streak, and then they ended up, winning 15 games and ended up losing 1. I know they went on a crazy winning streak last season, and it wouldn't surprise me if they try to continue their winning. Now, the next team on this list, this team ended up going all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals before getting swept by the Boston Celtics. Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers, they were the 6th seed in the postseason, but they didn't really surprise everyone beating Milwaukee because everybody was injured when they went up against them in Milwaukee. The Knicks ended up getting injured as well. And again, most of the teams that the Pacers ended up beating to get where they were in the postseason were injured teams. And the Celtics, finally being the first team that wasn't injured, ended up sweeping them. So if I was a Pacers fan, which I'm not, I would really, it would really depend on how healthy Halliburton is for the season. And if Halliburton really is that generational point guard and that ridiculous offensive talent that the Pacers have been looking for. And if the Pacers were able to go to the Eastern Conference Finals with Halliburton as the main option and riding Halliburton all the way, and with him not at 100%, then the sky is really the limit for this guy. And you could probably be slated to making it to the Eastern Conference Finals year after year after year with a player as talented as Halliburton. And so really, like, I'd have a lot of high hopes if I was a fan of this team, especially because, like, you know, nobody expected them to make where they were last season. Next on this list is the first play-in team and the only play-in team on this list, the Chicago Bulls. They finished as the 9th seed and they ended up losing in the play-in tournament. But they finally have the ability to rebuild. They traded away DeMar DeRozan, and they finally got rid of that duo with Zach LaVine and DeMar. And Caruso is also gone. LaVine and Vucevic, they're on the roster still, so we're still gonna have to see exactly what the Bulls have in plan for them. But at least the Bulls are trying to, consider a rebuild, I guess you could say. And they have Matas Buzelis for the future, and they could also drop below the play-in and actually start rebuilding, which is something that I really think that the Chicago Bulls should consider. They've never been able to have a solid rebuild because every single year they're trying to make a team for Zach LaVine, and every single year that team ends up being worse than you can possibly imagine. So now that they finally have a nice rebuild going, I think they should continue to get as worse as they possibly can. I know that's not really like a lot of people wouldn't like the losing attitude of constantly losing every single game just to gain better picks in the draft, but sometimes you have to do that if you want your team to just get better. Excuse me. And it's not something that people want to do. Like, obviously, the players aren't going to be fans of losing, but if that's what it takes to draft good players, then that's what it takes. Excuse me. Drafting good players like Cade Cunningham for the Detroit Pistons. So, the Pistons, they've been bad like every single year. For years, they've been bad. And for years, they didn't have that number one option and like that number one star at any position. Now they finally do at the point guard with Cade Cunningham. And now that they have Cade Cunningham, they just have to build around him pretty decently. And if they really build around him, then he could probably be a really nice asset to have for Denver. Now, not Denver, excuse me, for Detroit. Obviously, Detroit isn't going to win a championship anytime soon. They were the worst team in the NBA by far. But I wouldn't say that Pistons fans don't really have the right to be optimistic. Their roster did get better, and they just really have to build the best team that they possibly can around Cade Cunningham these coming seasons that Cade is going to be in the league. Like, that's really going to be the most important thing if I was a Pistons fan and if I were the Pistons going into the future. And they have to put young guys with upsides and proven veterans as well, and other good players to be good floor raisers, and also they have to consider, like, the head coach that they get, and because, like, there's still a team that's, like, in the debate on who their head coach is going to be for the future of the team, obviously, because they outpaid, well, not really outpaid, but they just, they dealt with the last coach, Monty Williams, and now that they have JB Bickerstaff on the head coaching roster for the Detroit Pistons, they're gonna have to see if he's going to be the right coach for the job, and he's going to be the right fit for this team, and see if he can actually, take this team pretty far. He took the Cavs to as far as, the second round when they weren't really expected to. So I guess that's something. Last year they made it to the first round, but they lost to the New York Knicks. So, obviously something that they want to forget, but he still has a lot to prove, I guess you could say, in the NBA. Let me know in the comments if you think that he's going to be a really decent coach. But with that out of the way, we are out of time for this first segment. So now I will go ahead and go into a break where I go into the next segment where I talk about some of the top teams in the NBA and what exactly would be stopping them from winning a championship next season. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to be talking about some of the top NBA teams and exactly what would be stopping them from winning a championship in the next season coming up. So before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody that we do love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a burning question, a hot take from a game, or something you've been dying to share. We are all ears. The show is all about keeping the conversation lively. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, you can use the super chat button where you just hit the $sign below the chat box, send in a message. It's going to be guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel as well. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can also use the link displayed below the ticker, as well as the link in the description, gsmcpodcast.net. Either one of those really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself. And let's go ahead and talk about the top teams and exactly what's going to be stopping them from winning a championship in this coming year. So the first team is going to be talking about the Lakers obviously, the Lakers, they have LeBron and they have Anthony Davis. And as long as you have those two players on a team, you immediately have a team that's contending for a title. Like, they've also already proven just how good they are on a global scale with their performances on Team USA. So they've just played some peak basketball, some of the best basketball that you could see in the Olympics, and obviously, that's going to translate into the NBA. And they were a playoff team last year. They ended up losing in the first round to the Denver Nuggets. They ended up losing in 5 games, and obviously, it wasn't a better performance than what they had the previous year, where they lost to Denver in the third round, the Western Conference Finals. They got swept by Denver. I mean, they got farther into the postseason, but ended up getting swept. But aside from that, they're the big thing that's stopping the Lakers really are the rest of the role players and just how inconsistent they are compared to LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like, LeBron and AD really outshine everybody on the entire Lakers roster. And they weren't really that good last season. Again, they were lucky that they even were in the postseason. And that man right there in the background, D'Angelo Russell, he was awful in the postseason. And LA, they had a lot of injuries last year as well. LeBron James and Anthony Davis were pretty healthy for the most part. If everything goes right, the Lakers should have a shot. But being number 10 overall, like, on this list, just hoping not to draw, like, that's really the biggest, like, for being number 10 on this list, the real biggest problem that the Lakers have, I guess, is matching up against Denver. If they don't match up against Denver, then they win the postseason, and which is kind of crazy. Like, last year, the team that they lost to was Denver, and the year before that, the team that they lost to and they got completely owned by is the Denver Nuggets. I don't know what it is, but Denver really, they have their best games when they play against the Lakers. I don't know what it is, but they're just ridiculous against them. And the next team on this list is the Phoenix Suns. Now, Phoenix is, like, they're one of those teams where it's like they didn't really change much from last season, but, they have to run it back because they still have the same players under contract, and, you'd be wasting all of these players and their talents if you're not going to run it back again in this next season. They were a 6-seeded team last year. They won 49 games, and they lost in a sweep to the Minnesota Timberwolves in round 1. And obviously they're going to be this high because Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, again, another Olympic duo that played very well in the Olympics, and a team that is theoretically going to be better now in this season than what it was a year ago. And, like, for the case of Bradley Beal, Durant, and Booker, they're impressive on paper, but obviously, when you put it on the court, they weren't all that impressive at all. And Booker has, improved his playmaking, especially, like, we saw that in the Olympics, but he's naturally a scorer. And Beal has also been struggling to stay healthy for the last 5 years. Having Royce O'Neal for the entire season after last year's pickup at the deadline is great, and the fortunate signing of Tyus Jones should also help this team. But this team is oddly constructed and not quite a top-tier team despite all the star power that they have. So really, the biggest weakness that they have is themselves, because, like, the one thing that really stopped them from last season was just their overall performance against a young Timberwolves team. And, the Phoenix Suns, they theoretically, again, they're a great team on paper. If Bradley Beal plays well, if Devin Booker plays well, and if Kevin Durant plays well, they could do really good things. But, it's all dependent on how well they play. Next team on this list is the Milwaukee Bucks, and they were another team that got eliminated early in the postseason, lost 4-2 to the Pacers, they have a lot. They are one of the top heavy teams in the NBA. Like, they have and they are one of the teams that have, like, a dynamic duo in the star power, like similar to the Lakers, the Suns, and now the Bucks. They have Giannis and Dame, and they're pretty good together as a duo. Now, the biggest thing that's, like, really stopping them is just staying healthy, in my opinion, at the same time, because it's like that's the biggest thing that stopped them from last season, just being unable to stay healthy. And even being able to land solid players on minimum contracts like Gary Trent Jr., Taurean Prince, and Delon Wright, the Bucks have they have the depth, and Giannis is good enough to keep pace with the rest of the Eastern Conference throughout most of the regular season, and Damian Lillard is still the same elite scorer that he is. But injuries have diminished Chris Middleton's game, so that means, Giannis and Dame, they're going to have to provide a lot more on the offensive side. Drew Holiday isn't as explosive as Dame, and the Bucks might miss the defense coming in from Damian Lillard compared to the defense that they had with Drew Holiday, which is one of the biggest reasons why the Celtics were so good as a team. But really the biggest problem is staying healthy when it matters most. If they can overcome that, then I think they have what it takes to be able to beat every single team. And Giannis in an elimination game is scary. Next team is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, they're going to be one of the more dangerous teams going into the future. They just lost in the Western Conference Finals last year, 4-1 in the postseason. They won 56 games in the Western Conference, and you could argue that the Timberwolves might be a little bit underrated going on this list. Now, Minnesota says that the odds maker for Minnesota has said that they completely overachieved last year, and the point guard position for the Timberwolves might be the one position where they're going to struggle in acquiring depth, because Mike Conley, he's 37 now. Rob Dillingham, he was the number 8 pick in the draft. He's going to have to develop rather quickly, but he's only 19 years old. Karl Anthony Towns has also struggled to not only stay healthy, but actually play well in the postseason, which has seemed like it's a very common trend of his to just be unable to play in the postseason, which is not something that you want from your second option. But Minnesota is a very good team. They should be a playoff team, but Rudy Gobert led teams tend to be vulnerable in the postseason due to his lack of offense, especially if opponents can draw him away from the basket, where he becomes an even worse defender. And I don't know how that's even possible. Now, next team on this list is the team that beat the Timberwolves, who that ended up making the finals, losing to the Boston Celtics. However, the Dallas Mavericks, they lost 4-1 in the finals to the Boston Celtics. They have the backcourt duo of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, and really that's all you need to be a contending team, just having those two. And really, the big thing that's stopping them is not only themselves. This is an offense where you sort of need to play well offensively if you're either one of these two. And if you don't play well offensively, your team's not going to perform. And if your team doesn't perform, then you're not going to win. And Dallas, they let Derrick Jones go in free agency. However, they did choose to bring in Klay Thompson, which could prove to be rather useful. He's not the same defender that he was in the championship days on Golden State because of the leg injuries, but he still could prove to be a very decent and a very reliable shooter for the team. So really, again, the biggest threat to this team is the three-point line, and if they can shoot enough threes and if they can hit enough threes. Next team on this list is the New York Knicks with Jalen Brunson, who just had one of the best seasons in recent New York Knicks history. They Ended up losing in the second round of the postseason, however, in 7 games to the Indiana Pacers, mainly because of the injuries getting to a majority of their players. And they were just 1 game away from making it to the Eastern Conference Finals. And they added Mikal Bridges to the team, who has a lot of chemistry with a majority of the players from Villanova. And the Knicks, they look like they are destined for a strong season, but Thibodeau and his rotations, they're like really, really bad, and they may have been what had led to the Knicks getting injured so quickly in the postseason because of how often he plays a majority of his players. And like really the question is going to be how many minutes can he burn from these players, and historically he doesn't really seem to help. Like as great of a coach as he is, he tends to grind out his players a lot, and he tends to play them for a hefty amount of minutes when he doesn't really need them to, and that that's going to cause injuries, and that's really the big reason why the Knicks weren't healthy to face the Pacers in the postseason. So if they're able to stay healthy, then they're deadly, but if they're unable to stay healthy, then that's a completely different story. Next team is the 76ers. They instantly become a favorite, despite the fact that they lost to the Knicks in the first round. They have instantly become a favorite, mainly because of the acquisition of Paul George. And, having a big three of Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Paul George is one of the biggest names and scores in this year's free agency market. Paul George, that was a big name in the free agency market, and the fact that the 76ers were able to land him, it's even bigger. So now you have Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and with the Sixers, George has been a part of multiple teams, and he hasn't really been able to get it done at the highest level over a pretty lengthy career and several all-star appearances in that allotted time. So it's not like he wasn't a talented player on these extremely talented teams, and he just really comes up short. And so the biggest thing for the 76ers this season is to make sure that they're healthy enough and make sure that they don't come up short when it matters most, when the going gets tough in the postseason. That's going to be like their hurdle, and that's going to be what they're going to have to overcome if they want to get a championship. Next team on this list is the Denver Nuggets. Now, they surprisingly ended up losing to the Minnesota Timberwolves in 7 games. And it was very surprising because Jokic didn't really play that well in that elimination game. They lost 4-3. As I said before, they lost in 7 games in the second round. And really, the biggest threat to them is if Jokic decides he doesn't want to play basketball anymore. Because if you have somebody as talented as Jokic on your team, you're most likely going to make the playoffs every single time. And he has great chemistry with the starting 5, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr. They let go of KCP, however, but they still have a really competent team. They just acquired Russell Westbrook I can't really say the market because he was traded to Utah, then he was let go, and then he decided to sign with the Denver Nuggets. But in the end of the day, they ended up acquiring Russell Westbrook, who might end up being a very important piece for them coming off the bench. They also have Bruce Brown Jr., Jeff Green. They do have like a real issue in depth, but again, they have Jokic and Jamal, so it's like, what more do you need? Now, the next team on this list is a pretty young team that, they still have a lot of years left under their belt. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they ended up losing to the Mavericks 4-2 in the postseason. And they recently added Alex Caruso. They recently added Isaiah Hartenstein. And they're a team that ended up going really far in the postseason. And they're really young. They're a really deep team. They have so many great players. They won 57 games last season. And really, it's hard to argue against a team that's so young and so talented. And they were a number one seeded team last season. But again, this is still a young team. And really, as much as I can praise them for being a young team and getting so much done, I can also, somewhat discredit them for being a young team and being an inexperienced team. So it's really the fact that they're inexperienced is the biggest upside of them and also the biggest downside of them. And finally, the Boston Celtics, the team that won the championship last season. And really, anyone who knows anything about basketball knows the Boston Celtics. They know the franchise. They know the success that the franchise has had. And they also know the recent success of this franchise. Now, this franchise has all of these players under contract for a couple more years, meaning that the possibility of them winning another championship is all that more apparent. And they have a chance to win one again this year. They have a chance to win one again in the year after that. And what makes this even crazier is that if Jeff Bezos, the guy that owns Amazon, if he ends up deciding to purchase a bit of the Boston Celtics, then there's a possibility that they end up re-signing their players again, because the luxury tax isn't really going to hurt him nearly as much as it's going to hurt any of the other owners, and they'll just be able to keep winning and winning with the roster that they have. And I didn't even mention any of these players taking pay cuts. Now, they're easily going to compete for a championship again this season. The best argument against the Celtics is that the Mavericks were a lower tier NBA Finals team, and as great as Luka Doncic is, Kyrie Irving didn't really play well against the Celtics, wasn't really that good of a matchup. And if a much more competent team, like let's say the Denver Nuggets, were to play against a team like the Celtics, I think the results would be a little bit different. So complacency issue really shouldn't be an issue. I get it. But, there's other variables that go into the luck and the consistency of winning a title. But, I'm not really going to harp on that. But again, that's just my opinion on the teams that have a chance in winning a title. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed a team, if I should talk about another team. But aside from that, I'm going to go ahead and go into the third segment where I talk about some teams that, some play-in teams that are either, going to be in the draft lottery or are going to be in the playoffs. So, I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that and, what I think their ceiling is and what I think their lowest point could be. So I'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we're back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about teams that have the best chances of being a playoff team, or the best chances that or the chances of them being a draft lottery team. And I'm just doing the teams that made the play-in for last season. So if there's any team that you would like me to do next, just let me know and I'll do them. But this is mainly going to be play-in teams. So, starting off the list, the 76ers, obviously, they're going to be a team that's going to be contending. I shouldn't have to really explain why. Acquiring Paul George, having Joel Embiid, and also having Tyrese is really going to push your team into that contending category. And again, my prediction for this team, easy playoff team, makes zero sense for them not being a playoff team. So, next team on this list is, again, this is in no particular order. I'm going to be talking about the Bulls. They're another team that have I think they're going to be a lottery team. I think they're going to be a team that's going to work on rebuilding this time. They have a 2025 first round pick owed to them by San Antonio, and it's top 10. And that's the real hope that they have of doing damage in the draft. The rest of the draft, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to, the rest of the players that they have, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to make the play-in this season. And I also think that maybe this will be the year where they finally be able to make a deal for Zach LaVine. And Chicago, I think they're finally going to be able to make the trade, and they won't be able to give up draft equity, though, and they're going to have to remove the remaining 3 years and $138 million left on his contract to some other players. And ideally, Vucevic is also going to, get traded as well, especially, with the fact that the experiment with DeMar, Alex Caruso, and Zach LaVine, considering how that didn't work, I'm pretty sure that this team is going to be a lottery team. Next, the Atlanta Hawks. They have Trae Young still. They also ended up getting the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. It's easier to see an improvement than a decline from each of the teams Miami, Philly, Indiana, Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, and Boston. All 8 of the teams finished with at least 10 or more wins than the Hawks in this season. So seeing the Hawks really dramatically improving compared to a lot of these teams isn't, especially after losing DeJounte Murray and not really gaining much in return, it's not really that feasible, I guess you could say. And if the Hawks keep on pace with the 8 teams that finished ahead of them last season, they could pursue future-focused trades, and Atlanta could end up dealing away Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, and any other vet who doesn't project as strong supporting pieces for the next iteration of the Atlanta Hawks. Again, they have Trae Young, they have that number 1 guard. As much as people want to see Trae Young get traded, I don't think the Hawks are going to do that. I think they're really going to try and build a really good team around him. He's already the Atlanta Hawks leader in assists for the total franchise. So again, very, very impressive. And next team on this list is the Miami Heat. Now they're, after this year, I have a feeling that they're going to end up losing Jimmy in free agency. And I don't think Jimmy is going to end up re-signing for Miami unless, again, they give him a lot of money. But aside from that, I still think that Miami is going to be a playoff team in this final year having Jimmy Butler. I think, despite the fact that this might be Jimmy's final year, they're going to make a statement in the Eastern Conference. And again, despite the fact that they were a play-in team, it's you sort of knew that they were going to make the postseason. They were also able to snag a win against the Boston Celtics, who were the best team in the entire NBA and in the entire postseason. They were able to beat the Hawks, they were able to beat the Bulls, they were able to beat the Raptors, they were able to beat the Hornets, and anyone else trying to get the 7th or the 8th seeds in the postseason. They're the team that's most likely going to be to win in all of those matchups. Now, hold on, let me just go ahead and change the screen real quick. There we go. And next team on this list is the Pelicans. Now, they are a team that ended up getting better in this offseason. They acquired DeJounte Murray to pair him up with CJ McCollum. They still got Brandon Ingram. They still have Zion. Zion also apparently slimmed down like a lot. So a lot of people were concerned on, his health and just how much he has been consuming, I guess you could say. And a lot of people were concerned on whether or not he would actually be in a good enough shape to compete early in this season, and it doesn't really look like that's going to be a problem now. I think this team, easy contenders. I think it's easy that they're going to make the postseason. It makes total sense. This is arguably, the best, one of the best teams that they have in this season. I mean, we just have to see how the pairing with DeJounte and CJ McCollum is going to work. If they are able to get that chemistry down, and if they're able to pair that up with Zion scoring and Brandon Ingram scoring, then it's going to be a pretty dangerous team. And I really, hopes are high for this team. Next team on this list is, again, the Los Angeles Lakers, and I might as well go ahead and show the Lakers off because, they were a play-in team, and there are a lot of reasons to believe that the Lakers are going to be better than they were a year ago. There's also a lot of reason to believe that they aren't going to be better than they were a year ago. One of the biggest reasons is LeBron, just how much he has left in the tank. Considering how good he played in the Olympics, I think he has a lot left. And the Lakers, they don't have that much of a talent advantage against anyone when James and Davis misses a game. Like, when they both miss a game, it's like, you're definitely going to lose. And it's like you're asking for trouble if you're sitting both of them out. Now, it's also uncertain if JJ Redick is going to be a good acquisition in the head coaching department. But, this team, I mean, they got LeBron. It's like, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, come on. It's LeBron. It's like, LeBron has seen worse. I mean, it's definitely not looking good for him out there, but it's definitely like you could argue that it's not the worst situation that he's been in. Again, would rather see him in a better one, but I digress. Next team on this list is the Sacramento Kings. They were a play-in team last season, and I expect them to be a little bit better this year than they were last year. Acquiring DeMar DeRozan is going to definitely do that for the squad. I predict they're going to be an easy contender for the playoffs. I don't think they're going to need to play any play-in games to make the playoffs for this season. And, I think they're going to be in that, a third seed, I think. I think that's a pretty reasonable spot to put them in. Memphis is probably going to be the team that they're going to, if they were to go into play-in, I would expect them to play the Memphis Grizzlies. I think that would be a really nice matchup to see. And finally, Golden State Warriors. I think they're another team that is going to be in the draft lottery. And, they do have Steph, so I wouldn't really count them out just yet, but for the most part, I'm counting them out. I mean, I'm sorry, this team doesn't have Klay Thompson. I don't think they're going to be the same dangerous team that we've all feared for so many years. But again, I could be totally wrong. This is Steph Curry. He's still on the team, so maybe he just completely shocks everyone and they make the postseason out of a miracle. But aside from that, I don't think they're going to make the postseason. I think they're going to rebuild, and I don't think Steph is going to want to be a part of that. But we'll see. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and go into a short break and then go into the fourth segment where I talk about Magic criticizing Anthony Edwards and his comments that he made about Michael Jordan being the only player with skill back in the day. So I'll be right back after this short break in regards to those comments.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to be talking about the comments that Anthony Edwards made towards, well, it wasn't really like directed at a specific individual, more so like a group of people that played basketball in a specific era. So Anthony Edwards the other day, he was talking about well, I don't know exactly how the conversation was brought up, but I do know he was asked a question in a press conference, and I do know skill ended up being mentioned in the conversation, and Anthony Edwards goes on and speaks on Michael Jordan being one of the only players in the NBA of his time that had skill. And I talked about this I think I talked about this a while ago in the segment that I did yesterday in regards to Anthony Edwards talking about these players getting drug tested, but I didn't really go into that much in depth about it. I didn't think it was that big of a deal until Magic Johnson ended up responding, because Magic clearly didn't really like the comments that Anthony Edwards made. I personally didn't agree with the statement. I felt like there were so many other players in the league back in the day that had a lot of skill, and Magic Johnson being one of them, and not to mention Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas, as well as other NBA players, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that played at the time. But Magic Johnson, he was another fantastic player that played back in the day that you could argue had fantastic playmaking skill and had fantastic playmaking ability. He wasn't the flashiest player on the court, but he did get it done. A lot of people consider him like the best point guard that the NBA has ever seen. So saying that he doesn't have skill and saying that Michael Jordan was the only player at the time who had skill is kind of disrespectful to somebody of Magic Johnson's caliber. And Magic Johnson, who is a 5-time NBA champion and a 3-time Finals MVP, his response was very, very cold, I guess you could say. During a speaking engagement, Johnson told ESPN Stephen A. Smith, "I never respond to a guy who never won a championship. He didn't win a college championship. I don't even know if he won a high school championship." So already Magic is responding and going at Anthony Edwards' career and his, I guess you could say, track record, and how much he actually ends up winning in a lot of these games. And it's you can't really Magic Johnson's just saying, okay, well, where's your hardware, right? Because Magic, he has a lot of hardware that can prove to a lot of people that he had a lot of skill in the NBA, as well as having a lot of skill in college. And I mean, winning 5 NBA championships in your career is just, it's a completely different accomplishment in of itself. And it's something that not many people can attain. On top of that, he was also able to win several MVPs. He won 3 of them, but still 3 MVPs, 3 Finals MVPs is a very impressive resume. And having that along with rings to complement your success just ultimately, like, it gives you the ultimate, like, advantage in any sort of sports argument, because it's like you can always be like, okay, well, where's your hardware? And not to mention, Magic Johnson, he mentions like his NBA championships. He also mentioned college, and back in college in I believe it was the late 70s, and I believe 1979, when Magic played in college, he ended up winning an NCAA championship. So not only did Magic win a NBA title, he also won in college. And I mean, he's not taking any sort of disrespect from somebody who didn't win in any sort of competitive level of sport. And so Anthony Edwards, again, he was 23 years old, so you could argue that maybe he's a little too young to win a title, but Magic Johnson won when he was a rookie. Like, in his first year in the NBA, he won a title, and he also ended up picking up the Finals MVP in that year. Like, he was a very talented player. Like, I will say he's a very, very talented player. I mean, winning a championship is just, it takes a lot to win a championship in of itself. And not to mention his performances in a lot of these games were also very, very impressive. And I mean, like, you have to, I believe he closed out the series in 1980 with a 40-point performance in it was either game 7 or in game 6. I don't know, I wasn't born at the time, but I do know that he closed out the series against Philly with a ridiculous 40-point game. And that 40-point game, it closed the series out, it cemented his Finals MVP, and like, I mean, again, it just gives him ultimate bragging rights, because it's like, unlike Magic, Anthony Edwards didn't end up winning the championship in his rookie year, so it's not like he can really talk about winning any hardware. So that's really all that I have on this. I think Magic, he obviously has every right to respond to this with in regards to the fact of saying that he has skill, because let's face it, it's Magic Johnson. He definitely had skill back in the day, regardless of what Anthony Edwards says. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and go into a break, but after that, we're going to continue with my segment going over players who I think don't deserve an MVP. So we're going on to the 90s, by the way. So we're in fact not done with the 90s. I know that's like it's a slogan a lot of people like to say, like, oh, we're done with the 90s, man, but we're not done with the 90s. So we're going to talk about the MVP of 1998 as well as the MVP of 1997, and I'll explain why I'm doing both of them right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned to listen to that segment. And we are back with the fifth and the final segments of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, I'm going to be talking about a player in a specific year who I feel did not deserve an MVP over another player. Again, this is a regular season award, so I'm only going to be talking about the games in the regular season and the stats regarding the regular season. So I can't really use playoff performance to justify, the MVP. And this time, I'm actually going to be doing 2 players in this segment because I feel like these players, they go in hand, and one of them won the MVP in the one year, and then the other one won an MVP in the year after that. But I think the MVPs should have been reversed. So this is the big reason why I'm doing both of these players at the same time, and I'm talking about both of their MVP years at the same time. So the 2 players that I'm talking about, obviously I mentioned that the MVPs, they were in 1998, and the other MVP was won in 1997. So the 2 players that I'm talking about are Michael Jordan and Karl Malone. Now, I'm not a fan of Karl Malone, and I do not condone his alleged actions off the court, and I'm not saying I am a fan of Karl Malone, but I am doing a list, and I am talking about stats, and I am talking about players to win MVPs, and, I can't really ignore Karl Malone, especially when I think that he actually deserves to win the MVP in 1998. Now, I'm going to continue on my take, but you're going to have to, hear me out on this. Now, I believe that, if this is a regular season award. So if you include the postseason, Michael Jordan is clear-cut the best player of 1998 and deserved the MVP. But since we do not need to include the postseason, I think that Karl Malone played a lot better in the 1998 regular season than Michael Jordan did. They both ended up winning 62 games in the regular season, so it was down to the player's production and a player's overall value to the team, more so than the amount of wins that the team ended up. And Karl Malone, that year in 1998, he ended up averaging 27 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists, along with 53% shooting from the field. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan that year averaged 29 points, 6 assists, along with 4 rebounds, as well as 47% shooting from the field. And, obviously Michael Jordan and the advanced numbers were close, but I would have much rather preferred Karl Malone this season as opposed to Michael Jordan winning the MVP in this season. However, I flip-flopped the assists and the rebounds. Michael Jordan ended up actually getting 6 rebounds in that season as opposed to getting 6 assists, and that's my bad. But again, I would much rather have Karl Malone's averages than Michael Jordan's averages, and especially considering how Karl Malone, he was averaging the same amount of assists that season as MJ, and MJ is a guard. That's kind of disappointing. And the only argument, again, that Michael Jordan really had for being the better player in 1998 was the playoffs. If you include the playoffs, then Michael Jordan was clearly the best player. But again, this is a regular season award. I can't justify Michael Jordan winning the MVP in 1998. However, this cancels out the MVP debate for 1997 because I don't think Karl Malone deserved the MVP for 1997. I think Michael Jordan deserved that MVP. So the debate sort of cancels out when Karl Malone, he ends up winning in 97, and then Michael Jordan wins the year after. So when you talk about players getting robbed of winning MVPs, Karl Malone winning MVP over Michael Jordan pops up a lot in this conversation. And, a lot of people say it's for a good reason. I don't think it really is for a good reason because it was really close, especially when you consider this year and how the MVP race was close this year. It was really close in 97. So, I don't see why a lot of people bring up this particular MVP as the MVP that Michael Jordan definitely blatantly deserved. Because Karl Malone, he averaged 27, 10, and 5 on 55% shooting for a 64-win Jazz team, yeah. And Michael Jordan ended up averaging 29, 6, and 4 on 48% shooting, as well as 37% shooting from 3. And the advanced stats in that season were also rather close. Like, it was also like, it wasn't like Michael Jordan was blatantly beating the Karl Malone in the advanced stats category, because, like, you know, it was still pretty close. And the Bulls, they ended up winning 69 games in this season as opposed to the Jazz winning 64 games. So that was another, that's another argument and another reason as to why Michael Jordan sort of deserved the MVP this season as opposed to Karl Malone winning the MVP in this season. And you could argue that Karl Malone ended up playing in a tougher conference, but at the end of the day, we know that Michael Jordan was the best player in the 90s, so it makes total sense that he should have won the MVP in 97. Like I said, the advanced stats were rather close, but I would have preferred MJ's season as opposed to Karl Malone's season. And, like, again, if I was voting in 1997, I would have voted for MJ. But if I was also a voter in 1998, I would have voted for Karl Malone. But, they ended up winning the MVP in 97 or 98 eventually. So it's like, it's not like either one of them, it's not like one of them didn't come away with an MVP. But so it cancels out at the end of the day. But let me know in the comments what you guys think of this MVP. Do you think that maybe somebody else would have rather had the MVP? Do you think that that the years that they won the MVP are just fine? Do you think that I'm just talking nonsense? Let me know in the comments. That's all I have for you today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us. So remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. If you really want to get your comment or question noticed or on the show, just go ahead and use Super Chat to get your voices heard and get your comment out there. And whether you have a hot take, a burning question, or you're just dying to say something, we're all ears. And if you want your question to be heard, if you want your comment to be mentioned on the show, just click Super Chat. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can also use the link displayed below the ticker or the link in the description, gsmcpodcast.net. That also works. You can put in a comment and a donation, and it'll definitely get mentioned on the show. And thank you so much for the support that you guys give us. And thank you so much for tuning in. Again, let me know in the comments what you guys think of the lists. That's all I have for you today. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.